Emily Turner drove back to Pike County with one simple mission. She was going to convince her grandfather to sell the farm. In the passenger seat sat a folder thick with numbers, a letter from the county attorney, 3 assisted living brochures, and a printed offer from Lakemont Ridge Development that made her hands tremble every time she looked at it. $12 million. Not 12,000, not 1,200 acres of future promises. $12 million in writing, for a farm the county assessor had valued at $840,000. The Turner farm sat 2 miles outside a shrinking Missouri town, where everybody still knew which families had been there for generations, and which ones had already given up and left. The grocery store had closed in 2018. The feed mill had been converted into storage units. Half the farms on County Road 6 had already sold to developers, and survey stakes dotted the ditches like grave markers. But her grandfather, Caleb Turner, refused to sell. At 84, Caleb lived alone on 214 acres of tired pasture, thinning timber, and bottom ground that flooded whenever the creek rose too fast. The farmhouse needed paint. The tractor shed leaned a little more each winter, and the old barn behind the house, grey, crooked, with a rusted tin roof and boarded windows, looked like one hard storm away from collapse. That barn was the real problem. Emily understood loving land. She understood memory. She even understood stubbornness. She had grown up around farmers long enough to know that pride could root deeper than fence posts. But she could not understand why her grandfather had spent the last 5 years sleeping inside that barn. Not in the house. Not in his own bed. Inside the barn, on a folding cot, beside a kerosene lantern, with an old wool blanket over his legs and his father's 12-gauge leaning against the wall. The first time she found him there, she thought it was an accident. The second time, she worried. By the 10th time, she started using the word everyone else in the county had already been whispering. Crazy. Not dangerous crazy, not cruel crazy, just old man living in the past crazy. And that broke her heart, because Caleb Turner had never been that kind of man. He had been steady, quiet. The kind of man who fixed things before anyone asked, showed up early, left late, and never used 20 words when 5 would do. He had buried his wife, raised 2 sons, survived drought, debt, and bad knees, and still managed to be the person everyone called when a fence was down or a calf got loose. But now he was the old man standing between a dying county and a development project everyone swore would bring jobs. Emily pulled into the gravel driveway just after 4 in the afternoon. The April sky hung low and grey. Cold rain threatened without falling. She parked beside the house, killed the engine, and sat staring at the barn. It stood 80 yards behind the farmhouse, with a black padlock on the main latch and every window boarded from the inside. Then she noticed the mud near the door. Fresh tire tracks. Not from Caleb's old pickup. These were wider, cleaner, with sharp tread that had not yet been softened by rain. Someone else had been there recently. Emily grabbed the folder and stepped out. "Grandpa?" No answer. She pushed open the kitchen door. The house was empty. Dishes were washed. The coffee pot was unplugged. His chair sat by the window with a seed catalogue folded on the arm. She knew where he was. Emily crossed the wet yard. The wind carried the smell of rain, old wood, and turned soil. When she reached the barn, she knocked on the door. "Grandpa?" Inside, something shifted. A chair scraped against wood. Then his voice came through the boards. "Emily?" "It's me." A pause. Then the lock clicked. Caleb opened the door only wide enough to look out. He wore the same brown canvas coat he had worn every winter since she was a child. His white hair was combed back. His face was thinner than she remembered, but his eyes were still clear. Too clear for a man people called crazy. "You should have called," he said. "I did. 4 times. Phone's in the house. That's not helpful if you're never in the house." He looked past her toward the driveway, then toward the road. His jaw tightened when he saw the tire tracks near the door. "You come alone?" "Yes." "Grandpa, what is going on?" He opened the door wider. "Come in, out of the damp." The smell hit her first. Old hay, dust, machine oil, rain seeping into wood. Underneath it all, something colder, like stone after a storm. Inside, the barn was cleaner than she expected. Tools hung in rows. Coffee cans sat on labeled shelves. A folding cot rested near the east wall. Beside it sat a lantern, a thermos, and a framed photograph turned face down. Emily saw the shotgun and felt her stomach tighten. "Grandpa! It's not loaded! Why is it here at all?" "Because people who come at night don't usually stop to ask permission." She held up the folder. "That's exactly why I'm here. You can't keep doing this. You can't sleep out here like some kind of night watchman. Lakemont is done negotiating. The county attorney said eminent domain is moving forward." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Emily pulled out the offer. $12 million. For land assessed at $840,000. Do you understand how insane this is? If the county takes it, you'll get fair market value. Maybe less after legal fees. You could lose everything. Caleb looked past her toward the center of the barn floor. "I won't lose what matters." Emily almost laughed, but there was no humor in her. "What matters? This?" She gestured around the barn. "These walls. This roof. Grandpa, I love you, but no barn is worth $12 million. For the first time, Caleb looked angry. Not loud angry, wounded angry. "The barn isn't worth $12 million, he said quietly. "Then what is?" He did not answer. Emily stepped deeper into the barn, trying to calm herself. She had rehearsed this conversation the whole drive from St. Louis. She had promised herself she would be patient, gentle, logical. Then she looked down and forgot what she was about to say. The floorboards beneath her feet were not random. Each plank had a small number carved near one end. 1, 2, 3, 4. The numbers continued in careful rows, some nearly hidden by dust, others darkened with age. Emily bent down and ran her fingers over one of the carvings. It was old, cut by hand with a knife. "Grandpa," she whispered, "why are the floorboards numbered?" Caleb did not move. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper, because if they ever came up, they had to go back down the same way. Emily looked around the barn again. For the first time, it did not feel like a building. It felt like a lid. The first offer had come in the fall of 2021. A man named Grant Holloway drove up the Turner Farm lane in a black SUV, too shiny for gravel. He stepped out, wearing a navy suit, brown leather shoes, and the kind of smile people use when they already believe the answer will be yes. Caleb was on the porch, sharpening a pocket knife. Grant introduced himself as Senior Acquisitions Director for Lakemont Ridge Development. He spoke about a regional logistics hub that would revitalize the corridor and bring Pike County into the next generation. Then he placed a folder on the porch table. $3 million, Mr. Turner. Cash offer. Full parcel. We'll cover relocation, closing costs, and any transition support you need. Caleb did not open the folder. "No." Grant smiled wider. "I understand this land has sentimental value." "No, you don't." The smile weakened. "Mr. Turner, with respect, this property isn't producing enough income to justify holding it. You're sitting on an opportunity most families never see." Caleb closed the pocket knife. "I said no." Grant left his card on the railing. Caleb used it the next morning to scrape mud off his boot. 6 months later, the offer became $7 million. By then, Lakemont had bought the Miller Place, the old Hanley pasture, and 80 acres that used to belong to the county judge's cousin. Survey crews appeared along the road. Orange flags dotted the ditches. Men in hard hats stood in soybean stubble pointing at maps. Everyone started talking about jobs. The hardware store owner said it might save Main Street. The county commissioner said young people might finally stay. The local paper ran a headline calling the project "A New Future for Pike County." And then there was Caleb Turner, alone on 214 acres, refusing to move. At first, people were confused. Then they were annoyed. Then they were angry. At the feed store, men who had known Caleb for 40 years lowered their voices when he walked in. At church, people asked if he had prayed on it, which was their polite way of saying they thought he was wrong. At the diner, a waitress who had served him breakfast for years told him, "Mr. Turner, that kind of money could bless your whole family." Caleb only nodded and left $2 under his coffee cup. The third offer came in person. Grant Holloway returned with another man, older, heavier, silver-haired, with a watch that looked like it cost more than Caleb's pickup. This time they did not sit on the porch. They walked straight toward the barn. Caleb stepped in front of them before they reached the door. "House is that way," he said. Grant gave a small laugh. "We're not here about the house. The silver-haired man, Lakemont's regional president, looked at the barn with open disgust. This structure is a liability. If we acquire the property, it comes down first. Caleb's eyes hardened. If you acquire the property, Grant opened his folder. $12 million. Final private offer. After this, we move through the county. Eminent domain will not be nearly as generous. You'll walk away with market value, pennies compared to what's on this paper. The older man added, "You're holding up a project that benefits thousands of people." Caleb looked at him for a long time. Then he said, "No." Grant stopped smiling. "Mr. Turner, it's a rotten barn. You're not protecting history. You're protecting termites." Caleb took one step closer. That was all. One step from an 84-year-old farmer. But Grant stepped back. "You don't know what I'm protecting," Caleb said. That was the moment Grant Holloway stopped treating him like an old man and started treating him like an obstacle. Emily stayed that night. She told herself it was because the rain had started and the roads would be slick after dark. But that was not the real reason. The real reason was the numbered floorboards. After supper, Caleb went back to the barn. Emily watched from the kitchen window as he crossed the yard with a lantern in one hand and a thermos in the other. She waited 20 minutes. Then she put on her coat and followed. The rain tapped softly on the tin roof. Caleb sat in an old chair near the cot, holding the framed photograph she had noticed earlier. He did not seem surprised when she came in. "I'm not here to argue," she said. "That'll be a first." She almost smiled. Then she nodded toward the photograph. "Who is that?" Caleb looked down at it. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. Instead, he turned the frame around. The photo showed two men standing in front of the barn. Caleb was younger, maybe in his 40s, with dark hair and strong shoulders. Beside him stood a black man of the same age, smiling with one arm around Caleb's back. Written on the bottom in faded blue ink were the words, "Caleb and Isaiah, August 1984. Emily studied the man's face. "I don't know him." "No," Caleb said. "Most people don't." "Was he a friend?" "My best friend." Emily sat on an overturned bucket. "I've never heard you mention him. Not once." Some things are too heavy to say at the dinner table. The rain grew heavier. Caleb set the photograph on his knee and looked toward the center of the barn floor. In 1984, that south wall started sinking after a week of rain. Your grandmother wanted me to tear the whole barn down. I would have too if Isaiah hadn't been here that day. What happened? We pulled up 4 boards to see how bad the rot was. Right over there, numbers 12 through 16. Emily followed his finger. And? Caleb swallowed hard. His voice, when it came, was different. Older. There was stone underneath. Not field stone. Cut stone. Foundation stone. And carved into it were 4 words. Mount Mercy Chapel, 1879. Emily stared at him. A church! A church! A school on weekdays! A meeting house on Sundays. The center of a place called Mercy Ridge. 43 families, most of them black farmers. Free people. Landowners. I've never heard of Mercy Ridge. Caleb gave a bitter smile. That's the point. He stood slowly, his knee stiff, and walked to the shelf along the west wall. From behind a row of oil cans he pulled a small metal box, painted green once, though most of the color had worn away. From inside, he withdrew a folded envelope. It was yellowed and brittle at the edges. "This is why I couldn't tell anyone. Not your father, not your uncle, not even your grandmother knew the whole truth." He handed it to her. Emily unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was sharp, hurried. The ink faded but legible. "Caleb, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I need you to know what we found under your barn isn't just a church. It's proof that Mercy Ridge existed. My grandmother was born there in 1902. My great-grandfather helped lay those stones. My family owned 27 acres of bottom ground and 12 acres of ridgeland. They were not rich, but the land was theirs. The county records say the families sold their land between 1911 and 1915. That's a lie. The county clerk at the time, a man named Harlan Holloway, forged signatures, sent tax notices late or not at all, blocked the road to the chapel, stole 43 parcels of land from families who couldn't fight back. I tried to get justice in 1985. I went to the courthouse. A week later, the ledger I asked about disappeared. 2 weeks after that, the old plat book went missing. A month later, someone broke into this barn while you were at market. They didn't find anything because I'd already hidden the records. But I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper a week after the break-in. It said, "Stop digging or your family pays. The Holloway family is still here, Caleb. The grandson, Grant Holloway, works in real estate development. I've been watching him. He knows what his great-grandfather did, and he'll do anything to keep it buried. Don't let them bury us twice. Guard this barn, guard these stones. Someday, someone will be ready to listen." Isaiah Bell, October 14th, 1989. Emily's hands trembled. "Isaiah died in this barn," Caleb said quietly. "December 1989. He'd been sleeping here for 3 days. Someone had been watching the farm at night." Headlights slowing down on County Road 6, then moving on. Isaiah refused to leave the evidence unguarded. On the 4th morning, I found him slumped in that chair. Heart attack. The metal tube with the freedom document. He'd hidden it under his cot the night before, waiting for the right moment. He never got the chance. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet but steady. Last thing he said to me was, "Don't let them bury us twice." So I didn't. Emily could not sleep that night. She lay on the old couch in the farmhouse living room, staring at the ceiling, replaying Isaiah's letter in her mind. The county clerk, the forged signatures, the threat left on a windshield, and Grant Holloway, the same man who had driven up the lane with a $12 million offer and a smile that assumed victory, the same man pushing eminent domain through the county. The great-grandson of the man Isaiah believed had stolen Mercy Ridge. This was not about a barn. This was not even only about a church. This was about a crime that had been buried for over a century, and a family that had spent generations making sure it stayed buried. She pulled out her phone and searched Harlan Holloway Pike County. Only 3 results came up: a marriage license, a death certificate, and a 1918 newspaper clipping about a county clerk receiving a commendation for service. No mention of Mercy Ridge, no mention of black landowners, no mention of missing ledgers or roads that disappeared from maps. It was as if Harlan Holloway had erased the town and then erased himself from its story. Just before dawn, Emily pulled on her coat and walked back to the barn. Caleb was awake. He sat in his chair, the green metal box open beside him. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents she had not seen the night before: a hand-drawn map, a small black-and-white photograph of a whitewashed chapel, a church ledger with names written in careful script, birth records, marriage records, and a list of 43 families. There was also a folded deed with the name Elijah Bell on it. "Isaiah's great-grandfather," Caleb said. Emily knelt beside the box, afraid to touch anything. "Why didn't you take this to the authorities?" "I tried, quietly. In 1990, after Isaiah passed, I went to the state archives in Jefferson City, showed them copies. A woman there said she'd look into it. What happened? 2 weeks later, I got a phone call, a man's voice. He said, 'Mr. Turner, some history is better left undisturbed. You have a family. Think about them.' Then the line went dead. Emily felt ice move through her veins. Was it Grant? Could have been his father. Lawrence Holloway. He was still alive then. Powerful man. Donated to every political campaign in 3 counties. Nobody crossed him. So you just stayed quiet. For 40 years. Caleb's jaw tightened. I stayed quiet because I had a wife and 2 sons. Because the people who stole Mercy Ridge were still in power. Because Isaiah told me, proof only matters if it survives long enough to be believed. He looked at the box. But I didn't do nothing. Every board in this floor is numbered because I lifted every single one. I documented everything. Photographs, measurements. I sealed the foundation so water wouldn't destroy the carvings. And I waited. For what? For the right person to tell. Someone young enough to fight, but old enough to understand what's at stake. He looked at Emily. I think that's you. The court order came on a Friday. Sheriff Daniel Price drove up the Turner driveway with a folded paper in his hand, and regret all over his face. He had known Caleb since he was a boy. He had fished in Caleb's creek, eaten Dorothy Turner's peach cobbler, and once borrowed Caleb's truck when his own died outside the VFW hall. He did not want to be there. Caleb met him on the porch. Emily stood behind the screen door, listening. "Caleb," the sheriff said, "I'm sorry." Caleb took the paper but did not open it. "When?" Monday morning, 7:30. The barn first. Sheriff Price looked down. That's what the order says. Lakemont's lawyers pushed it through. They're calling it a safety hazard. Emily opened the screen door. You can't be serious. There may be a historic foundation under that barn. Protected graves. I told the county attorney. I told him what Caleb claimed. And, the sheriff's silence answered, nobody had filed a formal complaint. Without one, the county attorney had nothing official to investigate. Grant Holloway had worked fast. The commissioners signed off, the judge rubber-stamped it, and by Monday morning, the barn would be rubble. Anything underneath could be classified as accidental damage during standard demolition. That night, Emily stayed in the barn with Caleb. Through the barn window, she saw headlights moving slowly down County Road 6. They paused at the end of the driveway. Then they moved on. Caleb did not even look up. They've been doing that for weeks, he said, making sure I'm still here, making sure I haven't moved anything. Emily shuddered. Who? Could be Lakemont security. Could be someone else. Doesn't matter now. They sat together in the lantern light. The green box rested between them. Caleb had laid out every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence Isaiah had preserved. Tomorrow morning, Emily said, when they show up. You stay back, Caleb said. You let me handle the sheriff. And if the sheriff can't stop them. Caleb reached into the box and pulled out a small folded map, newer than the others, drawn on modern paper. Isaiah made this in 1988. It shows where every family's land was, with the original property lines. It matches the old surveys, the ones that disappeared from the courthouse. If something happens to me, you take this box. You drive to Jefferson City. You don't stop until someone listens. I'm not leaving you, Emily. His voice was firm but gentle. I've been guarding this barn for 40 years. I'm not afraid of losing it now, but I am afraid of losing you. She took his hand and held it. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Caleb said quietly, Isaiah used to say that land can remember, but people have to listen. I think enough people are ready to listen now, don't you? Emily looked at the documents, the names, the photograph of the White Chapel, the deed with Elijah Bell's name. Yeah, she said, I think they are. By 7:15 on Monday morning, County Road 6 was lined with trucks. Some belonged to workers. Some belonged to neighbors who pretended they were just passing by. Some belonged to people who had come to watch an old man finally lose. Lakemont's equipment arrived in a clean procession. 2 bulldozers, 1 excavator, 3 pickups, a flatbed trailer, and a white SUV with the company logo on the door. Grant Holloway stepped out wearing a hard hat and a reflective vest over a pressed shirt. He looked almost cheerful. Sheriff Price parked near the driveway and walked up to Caleb. You need to stand clear, Caleb. Caleb was already dressed in clean jeans, a flannel shirt, and the brown canvas coat. His hair was combed. His boots were polished. Emily stood beside him, holding the green metal box. I'll stand clear, Caleb said. But you remember what I told you. The sheriff looked toward the barn. I remember. Grant approached with a clipboard. Mr. Turner, I'm glad to see you're cooperating. Miss Turner, I know this is emotional, but I promise the county will benefit. Emily held the box tighter. What comes next depends on what you find. Grant's smile flickered, just for half a second. Then he turned to the demolition crew. Start with the south wall. The bulldozer rumbled forward. Its blade rose against the grey morning sky. 40 years of storms, droughts, and silence. 40 years of one old man and a promise. Now steel rolled toward it. Just before the blade touched wood, Sheriff Price raised his hand. Hold it! Grant spun around. What are you doing? The sheriff walked toward Roy Meeks, the thick-shouldered foreman, who had spent 20 years tearing down buildings across 3 counties. Pull the floorboards first. Grant laughed sharply. That is not necessary. We have a court order. Sheriff Price looked at him. And I have a property owner claiming possible historic material under that structure. We check, or I shut this site down until the state checks it for us. Your choice. The foreman looked from one man to the other. Then he shrugged. Doesn't hurt me to pull boards. Grant's face tightened. Fine. Make it quick. Roy Meeks and 2 workers entered the barn. Emily could not see from where she stood, but she heard the sound of pry bars biting into old wood. One board came up. Then another. Then another. Dust rose through the doorway. Then the sound stopped. Completely. Roy Meeks stepped out of the barn holding his hard hat in one hand. His face had gone pale. "Sheriff," he said, "you need to see this." Grant cursed and pushed past him, but the sheriff held out an arm. "Not you." Grant stared at him, eyes blazing. Sheriff Price entered the barn. 30 seconds later, he came back out different than he went in. He looked at Caleb, then at Emily, then at the machines. "Nobody touches this barn," he said. Grant's voice rose. "On what authority?" The sheriff looked toward the open door. "On the authority of 43 names carved in stone, and what looks like a grave marker with the initials AB and the year 1903. The machines went silent. The crowd stopped murmuring, and Grant Holloway, for the first time, looked afraid. Once the first boards were lifted, the barn stopped being a barn. It became a doorway. The foundation stretched 20 feet by 36, cut stone. A raised section at the east end marked where an altar once stood. The carved slab read, "Mount Mercy Chapel, 1879. Around it were names: Bell, Freeman, Carter, Willis, Boone, Harlan, Reed, Jackson, Porter, Miles. Dozens of them. Some clear, some worn by time, some no more than initials. But they were there, real, present, impossible to call imaginary. Roy Meeks worked carefully now, pulling boards one at a time. Under numbers 31 through 38, they found small stone markers, grave markers. No one touched them. No one needed to. The sight alone was enough to change the air. The laughing stopped. The whispering stopped. Even the engines were turned off. For the first time all morning, County Road 6 was quiet. Roy came out one last time, carrying a rusted metal tube, sealed at both ends. He set it on a clean piece of plywood. "That was wedged under the altar stone," he said. Caleb stepped forward. Emily touched his arm. "Grandpa?" His voice was unsteady. "That wasn't there when Isaiah and I closed it up. He must have come back. He must have put it there the night before he died." They did not open the tube with a crowbar. Roy used a small grinder to cut the rusted seal. Inside was another oilcloth packet, dry as the day it had been wrapped. Emily unfolded it with trembling hands. There were 3 items. First, a list of 43 names, every family from Mercy Ridge. Second, a hand-drawn map showing original property lines that matched the old surveys. Third, a document typed on brittle paper, dated April 15, 1865. Emily read it aloud, her voice breaking. "We were gathered at Mount Mercy Chapel on this day, after word of freedom had reached Pike County, to declare before God and witnesses that we are free men and women. This land is ours, by right of purchase and labor. Let no man, county clerk or otherwise, say we did not exist. Our names are our testimony." 43 signatures followed. Some were neat, some were shaky X's, but every single one was real. At the bottom, a line read, "Witnessed by Harlan Holloway, Pike County Clerk." Emily looked up. Harlan Holloway witnessed this. He stood in this chapel, watched these families declare their freedom, signed his name as a witness, and then his office helped erase them from the records. She looked toward Grant, who stood frozen near his SUV. "Your family didn't just erase them. They looked them in the eye first. For a long moment, no one moved. Not the workers, not the sheriff, not the neighbors gathered along the fence line. Caleb removed his cap, and for the first time in front of witnesses, he wept. By afternoon, the State Historic Preservation Office had arrived. By evening, the story had changed from development delay to lost freedmen's settlement found beneath Pike County Barn. News vans lined County Road 6. Somewhere in St. Louis, a newspaper editor was clearing the front page. Grant Holloway stood near his SUV, phone pressed to his ear, his back to the crowd. His voice was low and urgent. Emily could not hear the words, but she saw his shoulders slump. She saw him end the call and stand there, one hand braced against the vehicle, head bowed. Sheriff Price walked over to him. "Grant Holloway, the state investigator wants to ask you about some missing courthouse records from 1985 and about a break-in at the Turner Barn that same year." Grant turned. His face was no longer the polished corporate mask. It was the face of a man who had spent his entire career running from something that had always been waiting to catch him. "I need to get something from my vehicle," he said quietly. The sheriff nodded and waited. Grant opened the passenger door and reached into his briefcase. Then, whether by accident or on purpose, Emily could never be sure, his phone clattered to the gravel. The screen lit up. A text message was open, unsent, addressed to Dad. Emily bent down and picked it up before she could stop herself. The message read, Dad, the Freedom Paper has our name on it. Harlan witnessed their signatures. Then he helped take everything. It's all coming out. I can't protect the family anymore. I'm sorry. She looked up at Grant. He met her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, very quietly, My father told me to protect the Holloway name, whatever it takes. I've heard that phrase since I was 12 years old. Every decision I've made, every deal I've closed, it was all to keep this from coming out. And now? Emily asked. Grant looked toward the barn, toward the open door, and the stones beneath it. Now everyone's going to know what Holloway really means. He handed his phone to the sheriff and walked toward the patrol car without being asked. The investigation took months. Researchers came from Jefferson City, genealogists from a university in Columbia, descendants from Missouri, Illinois, Kansas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. They compared Isaiah's documents to tax rolls, church records, private letters, agricultural surveys, and courthouse books no one had opened in decades. Piece by piece, Mercy Ridge came back into focus. The chapel was built in 1879. The school operated until at least 1908. The road appeared on county maps until 1912. Several families had owned land in their own names. Some sales were legitimate, some were not. Some signatures did not match other records. Some witnesses appeared on too many documents. Some tax notices were issued after families were already marked as having sold their land. But one thing became impossible to deny. Mercy Ridge had been real, and the story the county had told itself for more than a century had been incomplete. The chapel foundation was designated a protected historic site. The burial markers were secured and documented. The Freedom Document, one of the only surviving local records of those families standing together and declaring their names, was carefully preserved by the state archives. Grant Holloway resigned from Lakemont within the week. The company, eager to distance itself, issued a statement about honoring history and donated funds for the barn's preservation. No criminal charges were filed for what had happened in 1911. Too much time had passed. Too many people involved were long dead. But the Holloway name was printed in every newspaper, from St. Louis to Kansas City. Some punishments do not need a courtroom. Descendants of Mercy Ridge families were contacted across 5 states. One woman named Ruth Bell, Isaiah's niece, drove 6 hours with a Bible wrapped in a towel. Inside the front cover was a family tree that matched 3 names in the ledger. She met Caleb beside the barn. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she took his hands and said, "You kept them." Caleb shook his head. "No, ma'am. Isaiah kept them. I just kept the roof from falling in." The ceremony happened the next spring. There were folding chairs in the grass, a small tent, a wooden sign, the old barn standing behind it, with its doors open for the first time in decades. The sign read, Mercy Ridge 1879 to 1916. A community remembered Ruth Bell came with her grandchildren. Families named Carter, Freeman, Porter, Reed, and Willis came too. Some were descendants. Some were still tracing their roots. Some came because they had heard the story and needed to stand there anyway. Sheriff Price stood at the back in uniform. Roy Meeks, the demolition foreman, brought his wife. When Caleb saw him, he walked over and shook his hand. Roy looked embarrassed. "I almost knocked it down." "But you didn't," Caleb said. "That sheriff stopped me." "No." Caleb shook his head. "You stopped when you saw it mattered. That counts." Roy nodded, eyes wet. When it was Caleb's turn to speak, he walked slowly to the front. Emily offered her arm, but he shook his head. He wanted to stand on his own. He looked at the people gathered in the grass. Farmers, neighbors, reporters, descendants, children too young to understand why their parents were crying. Then he unfolded one small piece of paper. "I'm not much for speeches," he began. "My friend Isaiah Bell was better with words than I ever was. He told me once that land can remember, but people have to listen." He paused and looked back at the barn. For a long time, not enough people listened. "Maybe I didn't do everything right. Maybe I should have spoken sooner. Maybe I should have trusted more folks. I don't know. An old man gets some things right and some things wrong. His voice tightened. But I made a promise to my best friend, and today, I can say I kept it. He looked at Ruth Bell. Mercy Ridge was here, your people were here, their names were here all along. No one clapped at first. It did not feel like a clapping moment. It felt like a silence that finally meant respect instead of erasure. Then Ruth Bell stood, then Emily, then the sheriff, then everyone. Caleb lowered his head. Not proud, not ashamed, just relieved. Caleb Turner never took the $12 million. The farm remained in the family. The barn was stabilized, but not restored to look new, because Caleb refused. "Don't make it pretty," he told the preservation crew. "Make it honest." So they kept the weathered boards. They braced the leaning wall. They sealed the roof. They left the old door scarred and grey. Inside, a section of the floor was preserved under glass. Visitors could see the numbered boards, the chapel stones beneath them, and a copy of Isaiah Bell's letter. The original documents were kept safely in the state archives. Caleb insisted on that. No sense saving a thing from one barn just to lose it in another. Emily stayed. She told herself it was temporary at first, just to help with paperwork, then interviews, then family calls, then grant applications. Somewhere along the way, she stopped saying, "Grandpa's farm," and started saying, "our farm." 2 years after the bulldozers came, Caleb walked with Emily to the barn at sunset. The fields were golden. The creek was low. The road beyond the ridge was quiet. He was slower now, but his mind was clear. At the barn door, he stopped and rested one hand on the frame. "You still think I was crazy?" he asked. Emily smiled through tears. "A little," he chuckled. "Fair enough." Then she looked inside, at the numbered boards and the stone beneath them. "But I think sometimes crazy is what people call you when you remember something they forgot." Caleb nodded. "I can live with that." He reached into his pocket and handed her the old barn key. Emily stared at it. "Grandpa, it's yours now. I don't know if I can do what you did. You won't have to do it the same way. Just don't let anyone tell you old things don't matter because they're inconvenient." He closed her fingers around the key. That evening, Emily watched him walk back toward the house. For the first time in years, he did not look back at the barn. He did not need to. The truth was no longer hidden. The promise was no longer his alone. And the old barn, the one people had called rotten, useless, and ready to fall, remained standing at the edge of the field. Some barns are built to hold hay. Some are built to hold machines. Some are built and forgotten. But Caleb Turner's barn held something stronger than wood, stronger than money, and stronger than the machines sent to tear it down. It held 43 names. It held a lost town. It held a promise between two friends. And it held proof that the people of Mercy Ridge had stood together, free, proud, and witnessed, declaring that their names would never be erased. For 40 years, while the county laughed, while developers circled, while even his own family begged him to let go, one old farmer stood guard over the only truth left beneath the floor. Because some land is not valuable because it can be sold. Some land is valuable because it refuses to forget.